All right, we got it. All right, so we're going to continue along with our faculty development sessions. Today we're talking about more of theory of teaching, pedagogy versus andragogy, preparing for adult learners. So again, no financial disclosures, but I will disclose that I recognize the irony that I'm giving a lecture on why not to lecture. So our objectives, we're going to define the terms, describe the different learning styles, and then finally some applications for the incoming residents. So pedagogy, by definition, is the art and science of helping children learn. And, it's the classic teacher in the front of the room, students all sitting in the classroom listening. You're being spoon-fed information. We really fixate on the knowledge that the teacher has and imparting that knowledge into the students. And we've all done this in one way or another, whether it be when we were residents ourselves versus giving lectures to medical students or residents. And we all like to think that we're like Robin Williams when he played Mr. Keaton in Dead Poets Society. Jumped up on that desk and he boldly stated, "I stand upon my desk to remind myself that we must constantly look at things in a different way." He inspired these students. He told them to suck the marrow from life, to find beauty in poetry, to rebel against the standard quo. And we all want to believe that this is the same type of teaching style that we're going to have when we're up in front of the room. But unfortunately, we've all experienced and probably been that teacher that's caused this to happen. Hearing the wah, 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 having our students fall asleep, having the student look confused both at us and at the student next to us. And this is really what we want to try to avoid when we're teaching with the residents, and try to get away from the standard teaching of a child. Andragogy refers to the methods and principles used in adult education. It's the opposite. And this is what we're going to focus on today. And, when you look at the history, this really picked up again in the late 60s, 1968 to be specific, when Malcolm Knowles wrote about using this in adult theory. But really, this is the classic way of teaching. Confucius, the Hebrew prophets, the Socratic method, this is all andragogy. This is all adult learning. It's actually not until the 7th century that we start having children being taught, and it was mainly to be able to transpose scrolls that were decaying. And so the kids had to learn how to read and write in order to take these decaying scrolls and retranscribe them. These monasteric ways of teaching went all the way to the 12th century when the secular schools started forming, and they still taught this style of passive learning, teaching down to somebody. But adults don't learn best this way, and we're going to find out why. Kind of the rules, the principles and assumptions that we make when teaching adults, that they must want to learn. Now, keep in mind, these residents that are joining us took all of last year to be on Zooms and Teams and WebExes just like this, and pitch themselves in interviews to try to match into residency. So they obviously want to learn. They'll only learn what they feel they need to learn. And again, we're speaking in broad strokes. But these are emergency medicine residents. So this is part of their contract too. They're here to learn emergency medicine. So that's what we need to teach them. They learn best by doing. And again, they're going to be in the department with us for the majority of their residency. And if not in our service, they're going to be in services that relate to emergency medicine, and will learn by tactile, hands-on learning. Adults learning focuses on problem solving. They're going to just see cases, they're going to have to think through things, and this also is what adults do best. Their experiences affect adult learning. Now, in the past, we could always assume that med students came in with a certain amount of knowledge, having experienced a certain amount of things, and this is going to be one of the first years where students' education really can be varied. Some having a lot of hands-on learning, and because of the pandemic, some not having nearly as much learning. So that first month that we have them, we're going to have to kind of ramp them up to make sure that they're all on an equal level. Adults learn best in informal situations. They're going to be taught at the doctor station. They're going to be taught at the bedside, not necessarily in a classroom setting or even something like this, except for during didactics. So when they're working with us, this informal situation and settings, these are the best times to take charge and make sure that they get their education. And finally, they want guidance and considerations as partners in the process. They want to have a say in what they're learning and how they learn. So that feedback module that we've talked about, making sure that we give good feedback throughout, we also have to take feedback as part of this process. And this is part of the contract, that we find out how we're doing teaching. So let's talk a little further. When we compare the two styles of teaching, self-directed learners versus learners dependent on the decisions of the teacher, larger amount of life experience versus few life experiences, learning needs closely related to social roles versus learning needs that are dictated by the teachers, being problem-centered versus subject and content-centered, intrinsically motivated versus extrinsically motivated. My kid took the FSA today, my third grader. He didn't want to take that test. He had to be forced to take that test. He had to be told that it was important, and we had to come up with reasons why it was important for him to take it. Our students are going to understand that the tests that they take, the cases they pick up, this is all important for them learning emergency medicine, learning how to take care of patients, and getting the ultimate goal of becoming board eligible and eventually board certified in their field. So the way that we approach the students have to be different. So why does this matter? Well, people tend to put every word they're going to say on their PowerPoint slides. Although this eliminates the need to memorize your talk, ultimately this makes your slides crowded, worded, and boring. You'll probably also start talking like this. You'll lose your audience's attention before you even reach the bottom of your slide. When we're trying to design talks and topics and we're giving lectures, those of us that will be in this group, we have to keep in mind that we want to avoid things like this. The adult learner isn't going to want to just read a slide. And in fact, I know that every one of you was able to read that entire slide before I could slug through it. You don't want to have these wordy PowerPoint slides or whatever you use when you're talking to the adult learner. Along the same lines, you don't want a crowded slide like this. You don't want to say that this is all the important information, have it large, blurry, crowded, not being able to see anything on there. We could give an entire talk or series of talks on how to design PowerPoints and how to, make things pop for your learners. But I thought it was important, as we're talking about the theory behind it, that for those of you that are going to be giving lectures and giving talks, try to avoid these kind of things when dealing with adult learners. You should avoid it with kids either. There's no way that a child would be able to follow either one of those slides. But why does it matter? This is where the teaching is going to take place. This is where the theory is going to really come to practice. It's going to be at the doctor station. It's going to be at the bedside. These are the informal settings. It's not going to be the whiteboard. It's not going to be the PowerPoint. It's not going to be the Zoom. It's going to be dealing one-on-one or one-on-two with adult learners, trying to get the ideas across to impact their education. So how are we going to apply this, taking the theory, the practice, and get to the learning tree? First step is analyze your learning and your teaching with the theory in mind. Seems very heady, but what does this mean? You want to ask yourself, how can I apply these topics? How can I apply the concepts of teaching to the adult learner? How can I incorporate them into the process, and how can I apply these next few slides into my teaching at the bedside? Collaborate on the learning you're providing. This doesn't mean that you're grabbing another attending, that you're grabbing other students and trying to bring them all together for your teaching point. Instead, this is that feedback module where you have to take the feedback. Find out what you're doing while you're teaching and find out if it's working for the residents. Find out if the education that you're providing is the best way to provide that education. Find out if something that you're doing isn't working and how to fix that. And you do that through these collaborative measures. You also want to enable self-directed learning. And I'm not talking about the way that we were self-directed, go to the library. But instead, after you see the case with the resident and there's a learning point, You can give them multiple options on how they can find out more. In addition to your bedside teaching and your doctor station teaching, you can let them know about areas in Rosen's versus Tintinelli's. You can let them know about podcasts. You can let them know about certain blogs. You can give them other avenues to follow up more, let them discover those, and then the next time you work, make sure that they got those concepts, that they did their self-directed learning, and that the process is ever evolving. Use real world learning examples. It always seems that when we deal with something in didactics, that it comes up the next shift or two. At least it does for me. And probably part of that is because it's on the forefront of our mind. But when we have these real world examples, go back to that didactic learning, go back to what we've talked about, go back to the other examples and build on it. Adult learners learn best by having stories. So when they see a case, let them know that this is what they want to read about. This was a textbook case. Go back and read more about this, that reflect on it, see the other ways that permutations that it can take place. And that's how they're going to root their education and their learning process. Finally, we got to let our learners figure out themselves. And just like this mother trying to let the child get on the two-wheeler, this is one of the hardest things that we can do. Now, there's ideas about patient safety that we can never let go of. Patient safety has to come first. But it's okay to let a learner work through a process, different than the way that we would do it. If we can do something in 1 or 2 steps and they're taking the long way to get to the same answer, we've got to let them do that. We've got to let them develop their own style, their own comfort. You know, the idea that there's 50 ways to skin a cat, there's more than one way to work up a patient. Now, if we've told them, we've sat down, you've explained your way of doing it, but they know that their way is going to work better and it's not going to cause harm, and that's the key. We've got to let the learner have that experience. Now, perhaps they have a better way of doing it than we do, and we have to check our own ego and admit that. Or they may find out that what they did took much longer, they had a longer disposition and more troublesome way of dealing with the case all in all, and that can be the teaching moment at the end of the day. But ultimately, the adult learner has to figure out things for themselves, and we have to give them just enough leash or enough rope to be able to do that. It's okay if they fall off the bike, with the caveat, as long as it doesn't harm the patient. So we've talked about the idea of the adult learner. Is there still a role for pedagogy during medical education? Well, just as this woman is trying not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, we can't throw out pedagogy throughout medical education itself. What we're doing right now is pedagogy. It's me lecturing and you guys passively taking this in. Hopefully, as we do this, I don't bore you too much to death, especially with a topic like this. But the topics that we do, we try to make it focus on your lecture rather than the slides content themselves. Have the adult learner listen to you. When possible, try to establish discussion within the lecture itself. So over Zoom, it can be tougher as we start to go back into the hybrid model and hopefully eventually getting back to everybody together. When able, we can get discussion going much better. But this is the basis of the Socratic method. And so you can kind of tie the adult learner with the child learner by adding in these discussions. Using technology. We're here on the Zoom, which is a great way to be able to be in Orlando, being in our own homes, being in the department, and being able to interact. So this is going to allow us to reach out even better. But beyond that, this also allows us to bring in speakers beyond our own faculty to participate in grand rounds, to be able to participate in didactics. You know, it's asking somebody to take an hour of their time to participate with our residents when they're able to, rather than having to fly in from out of town to give that same lecture. There's a lot of neat ways, as I'm sure all of us have learned over the last year, that we can use technology to be a little more savvy in our education. And we can take these tools that we learned during the pandemic and translate them into, rote education. And I think we can get a lot out of the experience for our residents. And finally, when available, small group instructions. As time goes on and we get a little bit closer, we're going to talk about the foundations of EM that we're going to be using to supplement our residents' education, and it utilizes a lot of these small group instructions. And this is going to be a great way to keep people interested and engaged and be able to get this information out to our residents. So in conclusion, it's not just the kids way versus the adults way, but ideally blending the two styles together when possible. At the bedside, remembering the importance of the adult learner, utilizing these principles of andragogy to best relate to our adult learning residents, and try to avoid looks like this during our didactic rounds and grand rounds, keeping our speakers engaged. And I hope as I go off my PowerPoint presentation, I look out and don't see any faces like this. So just when you think you know something and you have to look at it another way, even though it may seem silly or wrong, you must try. I thank you all for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, Kevin. Great stuff.
Thank you.